I'm going to call to order the Access Health CT Finance Committee meeting today. I will just remind people we're going to take several votes, and during the discussion, for purposes of record keeping, if you could announce your name before you speak, that helps us make sure to follow the conversation, and for those who are just following through audio only. With that, Marchen, do you want to make any announcements about the posting of the minutes and today's meeting?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this meeting is being recorded for the minute-taking purposes, as well as for the posting of the recording on the agency's website. This meeting is also being live streamed on the Access Health CT website. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. This is Claudio again. Then I will ask for if you could roll call attendance to confirm our quorum.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Claudio Gualtieri, Chair.
Here.
Matthew Brackman.
Here.
Thank you. Thomas McNeil. Commissioner Andrea Barton-Reeves from DSS. Commissioner Manisha Tutani from DPH.
Present.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Great. This is Claudio again. I just will ask and invite the Access Health senior leadership team that's present on today's meeting to quickly introduce themselves.
So good morning, James Michelle, Access Health Connecticut.
Gina Walsh, Director of Operations, Access Health Connecticut.
Holly Zwick, Director of Finance, Access Health Connecticut.
Susan Rich Bai, Director of Legal and Governmental Affairs, Access Health Connecticut.
Good morning, this is Glenn Jurgen, Director of Human Resources with Access Health Connecticut.
David, Director of IT, Access Health Connecticut.
Great. That brings us to the next item for the agenda, which is public comment. We did not receive any written or notification of public comment in advance of this meeting. I'll pause for just a second to confirm that that's the case. Marchen, I don't know if there's anyone who's raised hand or subsequently sent you public comment.
No, Mr. Chair, we did not receive any public comments.
Okay, thank you. Next item is review and approval of our minutes today. I hope everyone had a chance to look at them in advance of the meeting, and I will now entertain a motion to approve such minutes for the November 9th, 2023 regular meeting.
So moved, Matthew.
Thank you. Motion has been moved. Do I have a second? I guess I can second the motion. So I will second the motion. Claudio, any debate or discussion on the minutes today? Seeing none, let's call the roll. And this is for approval of the November 9th regular meeting minutes.
Claudio Gualtieri.
Yes.
Matthew Brackman.
Yes.
Thomas McNeil. Andrea Barton-Reeves. And Manisha Tutani.
Yes.
Thank you.
This is Claudio. I'll turn it over to Holly now, who will take us through the presentation for our next agenda item.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Again, Holly Zwick, Director of Finance, Access Health. Prior to speaking about the budget, I would like to give you a very brief update on our audit RFP. Our enabling legislation at the Connecticut General Statutes, Section 38A-1082, and Access Health procurement policy for contracting for personal services require that we solicit proposals at least every 3 years for financial and other professional services. In 2024, Access Health is required to procure financial services to meet this 3-year requirement. We are also subject to the requirements in the Quasi-Public Act at CGS Section 1-123. This act and the exchange's operating policy for audits require that we may not contract with the same person, firm, or corporation to conduct the financial audits of the exchange for more than 6 consecutive fiscal years. We are currently procuring audit services and will notify the board and finance and audit committees when we have completed a contract for financial and audit services. We anticipate having an auditor in place for the next cycle beginning after the end of this fiscal year. Thank you. Let's see. Next slide, please. This slide portrays the fiscal year 24 budget versus actual summary. Access Health is $176,673 under budget at this point in the fiscal year due to timing. Our shared budget with DSS is 1.1 million over budget, and I will be addressing this in a future slide. Next slide, please. Now, in more detail, on the revenue side, we're over budget due to stable interest rates and assessment revenue higher than projected. On the expense side, we're seeing some small savings due to some personnel vacancies. Next slide, please. This slide shows the full year budget adjusted after 3 quarters. As you can see, remaining flat. Next slide, please. Our full year 2024 budget after the 3rd quarter, as I said, will remain flat. I mentioned previously that on the revenue side, interest income has increased as rates have remained steady and assessments are higher than projected. On the expense side, we have spent more contractually on the call center and operations due to Medicaid Unwind, which is slated to end on March 31st. Equipment and maintenance also increased due to higher costs for system maintenance and IT enhancements rose a bit, with system enhancements predicted to start earlier than anticipated. Again, offsetting these increased expenses is a vacancy savings in salaries and fringe. Next slide, please. There will be no changes to our shared cost budget with DSS for Q3. Next slide, please. Carry forward projects from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24 are projects that were started back in fiscal 23 that will be finished by the end of fiscal year 24. And you could see them listed here. Just to note that some of these projects may be under budget, and in that case, the money left over would go back to reserves. Are there any questions at this point? Next slide.
Holly, I see none
yes,
at this
I'm
time yet. No, I was just going to confirm in case
Thank
you
you,
couldn't see
Mr.
this.
Chair.
Yeah.
Thanks. Next slide. Thanks, Martine. Is this Martine at this point, Mr. Chair, that there he is.
Yes,
Great.
so, we would take a vote for the fiscal year 2023 3rd quarter budget report.
So at this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the report.
So moved,
Do I have-
Matley.
Thank you. The motion has been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Giuliani. Any discussion on the 3rd quarter budget report as presented by the exchange staff? Seeing none, Martin, I'll ask for a roll call vote on approval.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Claudio Gualtieri,
Yes?
Matthew Brackman,
Yes.
Thomas McNeil, Angia Barton Reeves, and Manisha Giuliani.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Martine. Holly Swick again. This brings us to the investment report. Although it hasn't been quite 6 months since the last investment report, we need to review this topic again today since our next scheduled meeting is in November, and this is a biannual report to the committee. To briefly recap, the objective for Access Health CT exchange funds is to obtain the maximum rate of return while preserving the principal and providing immediate liquidity. Access Health invests in the state of Connecticut Treasurer's short-term investment fund, also known as STIF. This account is available for use by the state's funds and agencies, and state statutes authorize these pooled investment funds to be invested in U.S. government and agency obligations. These investment pools are under the control of the state treasurer. Next slide, please. The year-to-date earnings on the STIF account are $851,909. Access Health CT's investment portfolio is in compliance with our investment policy, and we can meet our expenditure requirements for the next 9 months. Next slide, please. On to our proposed amendment to the investment policy, which was last updated in 2012. Our investment policy core remains the same. There's just 2 points that we've updated. The first is we've added a section on 457B administration, which didn't exist back in 2012. And we have also updated the title of officers to match our current organizational structure. Next slide, please. The proposed fiscal year 25 operating budget is focused on similar strategic initiatives from the last fiscal year, including investments in IT, cybersecurity, and health disparities to aid in supporting our mission of decreasing the number of uninsured residents, improving the quality of healthcare, and reducing health disparities. Next slide, please. On the revenue side, anticipated grant income remains the same. Marketplace assessments increased due to the new assessment rate approved by the board last year. Actuals also came in higher than projected. Interest income, however, is anticipated to decrease due to interest rates. On the expense side, we are seeing an increase in salaries and fringe due to a 3% merit increase. Temporary staffing.
Hey, Holly, I think we're in the wrong slide.
Oh, I apologize.
That's all right.
Here.
Martin, yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So it's just a brief, marketplace assessments increased due to the new assessment rate approved by the board last year, and actual assessments came in higher. That interest income is anticipated to decrease due to interest rates. On the expense side, we're seeing an increase in salaries and fringe due to a 3% merit increase, and temporary staffing is increasing for additional resources to help with the CMS IRS audits. Now down to the contractual line item. This is made up of the call center, operations, marketing and outreach, and vendor contracted resources. This line item is increasing by close to $1.8 million due to increased costs in marketing, with 2024 being a presidential election year, as well as the call center incurring additional expenses, as well as IT initiatives. The next line item, equipment and maintenance, which make up software licensing, system maintenance, and equipment purchases, is increasing by approximately $500,000 due to an increase in APCD costs of approximately $323,000, along with increased IT maintenance, as we're always working on improving our systems. Additional initiatives are also driving costs up. Finally, travel has increased to $100,000 because we are able to travel more post-COVID, and travel has become much more expensive. Next slide, please. This is our fiscal year 25 proposed shared budget with DSS, with no change to the overall budget. Our call center costs are increasing, but our shared costs with DSS remain the same. We have seen minimum wage rise with inflation, as well as increased IT maintenance costs. The call center is the largest line item in our budget. To close the gap, we will need significant mitigation efforts. DSS and Access Health are working closely and collectively with our call center vendor to continue to improve the quality of calls and to minimize wait time. We are also very cognizant of the need to leverage all technology available by increasingly utilizing texting and emails in the marketing department, as well as exploring the callback feature for the call center. We are also planning on going out for RFP for the call center later this year, as we are always striving for the best value for the exchange. Next slide, please. The fiscal year 25 projected reserve fund balance is approximately $19.3 million, which equates to 6.2 months of operational funding. This includes $796,352 carried over from fiscal year 24. Are there any questions at this point? Next slide, please, Martine.
Thank you, Holly. This is Claudio. Just want to pause again just to make sure there's not any additional questions of what we heard you present on the operating budget, because our next action will be to take a vote to approve the FY 2025 proposed operating budget. So I'll pause, see if the committee members have any questions. I do have one question. I've
Yes.
noticed that, we took action as a finance committee, ultimately approved by the full board, to increase the assessment last time. And I know that we're running a little bit in excess of what we had projected for that
Mhm.
change. When may it be prudent, or would you advise that the board look at whether a slight reduction may be needed to calibrate to what the resources were if we overshot? Would it be when we hit our reserve policy maximum, or how do you suggest that this body continue to analyze and assess and monitor those costs?
Right. I'm actually going to revert to James for that.
Thank you, Holly. Claudio, as you know, when we create our budget, it's a projection based on, I think it's a 2-year average of premiums collected by 3 lines of business: small group, individual, as well as dental. So we again, it's a projection, so we don't know what the actual amount is going to be. Some years it's less than what we budget, other years it's lower. I think to answer your question directly, I think if we see a pattern, maybe after 3 to 5 years of us being higher than what we budgeted, then at that point, and we might look at at that point we should take a look at it. Should we reduce it? Then at the same time, our cost continues to increase. Even our cost is a projection as well, and so many things could happen that impacts our costs. It could be some type of major disaster anywhere in the world that drives up our costs, not just in terms of technology, but insurance is one of the areas that keeps going beyond our reach, above and beyond the technology. So to answer your question directly, I think maybe after 3 to 5 years, if we see consistent overshooting our expected projected revenue stream, then at that point we should take a look at it. But again, this is our first full year of implementing, first full fiscal year of implementing the new assessment amount. So again, after 3 or 5 years, we'll get a better sense of where we are.
All right. Thank you. This is Claudio again. Thank you, Mr. CEO, for that advice in that context. Appreciate it. I don't have any other questions. If other committee members don't, then I would at this time entertain a motion to accept the FY25 proposed operating budget as presented by Exchange staff. Do I have such motion?
A motion?
Thank you. Motion is made by Commissioner Giuttani. Do I have a second? I'll go ahead and second the motion. Marchin, if you could please call the roll. The motion is to approve the FY 2025 operating budget as presented by the Exchange staff.
Claudio Gualtieri,
Yes.
Matthew Brackman. Mr.
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you. Damas McNeil, Angie Barton Reeves, and Manisha Giuttani.
Yes.
Thank you.
I am here. I apologize. I'm having all kinds of computer issues. I finally got my phone working. It's less than ideal, but I do apologize. I am here.
Commissioner Barton-Reeves, did you want to vote on that? I don't know if you joined and heard the discussion and the vote, but we were just wrapping up the roll call for the FY 2024 budget.
Fiscal
I wasn't part
year.
of the discussion, but I have reviewed the slides in detail, and so I do feel comfortable voting if that's appropriate. Okay, so I would vote in favor if that's appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Commissioner. Okay. Motion passes.
Thank you. Then this is Claudio again. The next item is our discussion of the reserves policies. And for this, I'll turn it back over to Holly for a presentation.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as Mr. Chair just said, we would like to discuss our proposed reserve policy, proposed reserve fund, and our policy proposal for 9 months of reserves. As we are aware, organizations in the health insurance industry are prime targets for cyber attacks due to the personally identifiable info, also known as PII, that data that we store, and our connection to other government and financial institutions. The HIPAA Journal cites CareSource as an example of this type of cyber attack. CareSource is an Ohio-based Medicaid and Medicare plan provider facing multiple class action lawsuits ranging close to $10 million over a recent cyber attack and data breach. In another example of a public entity, the city of Atlanta in 2018 had to pay $17 million to restore critical services. There are 23 of such similar attacks listed for 2024, according to Insurance Business America. Next slide, please.
Holly, very quickly.
Oh,
Most
yes,
recently,
yes.
state of California, the California Exchange had in the call center, had a cyber attack where they had to shut down everything. And this was at the end of their 2024 open enrollment. And they had to spend a ton of money at the very end just to recreate a new call center because their call center got hacked and was shut down. So they have a lot of exposure. They're still working through that process now to see if there's any financial exposure to them.
Thank you for that, James. That hits home. We worked internally with our IT, legal, marketing, and operations departments to come up with a worst case scenario in the event of a complete shutdown of our system. Marketing and operations costs, including identity restoration and credit monitoring, are covered under the policy. However, the max payout is $10 million, and an absolute worst case scenario, unfortunately, could cost 5 or 6 times this amount. We do have a $75,000 deductible. Next slide, please. The finance team also looked at other areas of need for the reserve funding, such as implementing system changes and mandates. On average, we had to implement one major state and/or CMS mandate since our inception, including examples such as Medicaid Online very recently and Verify Lawful Presence a while back, with costs ranging from $160,000 all the way up to $2.7 million for each mandate. Next slide, please. The proposed reserve policy will determine the target reserve amounts as well as the intended uses of the reserves. This table shows Access Health's reserve funding balances and number of months of operating funding in years 2016 through 2023. Next slide, please. To outline the major points set forth in the proposed reserve policy, the designated funds are set aside by the board. We would like to target 9 months of operating funds, which would equate to approximately $25.2 million for fiscal year 24. The reserves will be funded using unspent revenue, and we will be adding $796,000 plus dollars in fiscal year 2024. The funds are to be used when there is an unanticipated loss of funding, for one-time emergency unbudgeted expenses, and for sudden increases in expenses such as COVID-19 or a terrorist act. A request to utilize reserve funds will be approved by Access Health Finance Committee and Board of Directors. Are there any questions?
Mr.
Claudio,
Chairman,
seeing that, yeah, go ahead, James.
Some context around this. We've had a lot of discussions about this policy over the last year and a half. We've gone back, done some research, came back with some additional information about the justification for 9 months reserve. We think 9 months is reasonable, although we are projecting worst case scenario maybe about $60-70 million. But again, that's worst case scenario. I think having a $25 million reserve could be helpful to us. It may take us a while to get there. And but once we get there, then at that point, and to answer your earlier question, then we can start entertaining. Do we start reducing assessment dollars once we hit our reserve mark?
This is Claudio. I'm recognizing that Commissioner Barton Reeves has her hand raised, so I'll call on you, Commissioner, for comment.
Okay, thank you, Claudio. I do have a couple of questions on first is on the last bullet. So is it any request to use reserve funds, or are there specific policies and dollar amounts. Because on the one hand, obviously, we would want to know when reserve funds are used, but on the other hand, I think we wouldn't want to tie the hands of the organization if we're talking about relatively small amounts, or is this any request? That's my first question.
I think if we are touching reserve, even if it's for $1, I would strongly recommend that we go back to the finance committee and the board to get approval first. Now, there may be some cases where if it's an emergency, there may be some exceptions to that. Even then, after the fact, go back and report to the board and get their approval after the fact. But preferably, having the board, the finance committee, and the board approve any money coming out of reserves before it is spent is probably a more appropriate process.
And
Okay,
I would just
thank you.
add, oh, sorry, Commissioner. This is
That's
Susan.
okay.
I would just add on to what
Yeah.
James was saying, that even in an emergency, and if for some reason we couldn't pull together a board meeting quick enough, we also have in our bylaws the ability to pass things by written consent. So that's another option, you know, if we really had an emergency and we couldn't pull together a board meeting, we could send around written consent, you know, for the board to
Right.
approve it to follow up with James's point of having that transparency with the board on
Okay,
any
and
use of reserves.
All right, and if my very, very rusty knowledge of the nonprofit law doesn't escape me, I think you need unanimous consent if you do it in writing, but I think that'll work. So my second question has to do with the examples that were just provided, which are very real, and the state is actually challenged with one of those as well, not internally, but with respect to Change Health, which is very public, and right, and healthcare providers that have been affected by that. So maybe this is a discussion for another time, but just really curious that to maybe at some point we can get an update on what we're doing at Access Health to provide greater levels of security. I know it's almost impossible to work around those kinds of vulnerabilities, but it would be a shame to spend a lot of your reserve in essentially ransom if we didn't have to.
Commissioner, we'd be happy to share that with you. Maybe we could plan a meeting. Marquise, our director of IT, and works very closely with the state's IT department. And again, we share responsibility with them. They're the first line of defense for us. So we are leveraging the state system for everything that we do. So I think it's worth having a conversation somewhere down the road to give you a full picture of what we have in place to minimize risk, this type of risk of happening to Connecticut, to the exchange. And I say minimize because you could never have complete risk-free environment.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
And our cyber policy would, one of the items, as Holly mentioned, that it would cover, obviously we have our coverage limits under the policy, but it does also cover ransom as well.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Matthew.
And I think maybe this got touched on in the commissioner's kind of question and answer at the first part of it, but don't we have decent enough cash flow? Like, what is the, like, I guess I'm lost on when is there an emergency that you need access to cash that badly that you couldn't have a week to figure out when to do a special meeting?
So, Matt, your question is, basically, we should always get board approval before we touch the money.
Yeah.
And that's my position as well.
Okay.
That's my position. And just saying that, but if something happened today and we have to spend money today, for whatever reason, under those extraordinary, extreme examples, I would call chair of the finance committee and chair of the board, have a conversation with them before we do anything. But I am much more comfortable having the finance committee's approval and the board's approval before we touch the reserve for any reasons, unless it's something so extreme. And then I cannot give you an example of what that is, but and it would have to be something extraordinary beyond our control for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling with that same thing of like,
Yeah.
You gotta have enough money in your bank account to get through a day, like, right? And you can always get us on the phone by that afternoon.
What-
Goes that
what-
level of emergency. It's
Yeah,
kinda- I
having
struggle with
cash. Yeah, having cash is not an issue. It's just if we have to go above the budgeted amounts, in something that was not budgeted, it's an emergency, and we need to tap into reserves. Well, we could pay for it, then go to the board afterwards to approve the reserve. If the board say no, we're not approving the reserve, then we got to reduce our operating budget to cover it. So we'll work it out. But before we touch reserves, I would be much more comfortable. I would want to have the finance committee and the board's approval before we take any cash out of reserves.
Yeah. Great.
So following up on the discussion here, the question I have and I continue to struggle with is this the most efficient way to deal with an emergency or a cyber attack? And more poignantly, is insurance the better way to go? I mean, should we be hoarding 9 months of reserve? This is a significant amount of money that's not really doing anything. It's not being reinvested into the mission or Access Health or anything like that. When most of that is to mitigate against a cyber attack, is it more efficient to just pay an increased premium and go above the $10 million coverage? Have we done an analysis on, is this the most efficient way to operate, is my question.
Susan, can you comment on the struggles we have in getting coverage for this type of exposure?
Sure. So I don't know how many of you have to deal with cyber insurance. It is very difficult to get this kind of coverage. We are very fortunate, and our outside risk advisors that work with our brokers have done a really fantastic job over the years since the exchange has been in business in getting us this type of coverage. In the very beginning, what James was alluding to, in the beginning of our operations, it was very hard to just get any liability insurance because we were a new entity, exchanges were unknown, and insurers just for all sorts of liability just, didn't really want to write us. So in the beginning, I think the most we could get was like $5 million of coverage. So that is one of the reasons that we've always required vendors, especially the call center vendor, that has access to all of our record PII and PHI to carry a lot of, we require them, I think we still require them to carry 30 million in cyber coverage, which is a significant cost to them. So you're always balancing all that too. So the insurance is not cheap either. So that's just another thing. We haven't done a specific analysis like you just referred to, Claudio. I mean, we could look at that if that's what the finance committee and the board want us to do. But just, keep in mind, cyber insurance isn't easy to get, number one, and isn't cheap either. It's not, millions of dollars, but it the more coverage you get, the more expensive it gets. And I don't know how much what policy limits we could get ourselves. And I think especially as this space increases in the risk, as Commissioner Ruiz referred to, in everyone in the healthcare sector, certainly a cyber carrier is going to look at that,
And
so
also,
that's just always a challenge you're balancing.
Susan, I read a while ago that less insurers are providing cyber insurance.
Yes.
So they are pulling out of it because the risk is too much, and it's also hard to price because you don't know how much it's going to cost. And in the insurance world, it's all about projecting your exposure, and sometimes they just don't know straight ahead. Everything's overpriced.
Yes.
But a lot of them, that market has shrunk, which makes it more expensive for everybody.
Yeah, and it is very hard to actually get it. So we've been fortunate that between our brokers and our outside risk manager, we've been able to procure that for the exchange. But, there could be a year when they all decide they're not going to write for anyone in the healthcare industry. I don't know that would happen, but that's always a possibility.
I mean, when you're supposed to go on in Florida, homeowners insurance going through the roof because a lot of the insurers in Florida are leaving because it's hard for them to predict how much they're going to have to pay from year to year. So similar could be happening in the cyberspace as well.
All right, that's good context. Commissioner Giuliani.
James said most of what I was going to say, but just to reiterate that I think we are seeing this more and more in the experience that, and in talking with other cybersecurity experts within the state and outside the state, this is the same refrain that people are talking about. So I think in terms of, you know, the insurance landscape and not being able to get insurance, and that the cost of what a potential cyber attack could actually be, being outside of what insurers want to be able to cover. And so I am supportive of the idea of having funding to be able to prepare for a cyber attack in the event that it happened, because I don't think insurance will completely protect us.
So, Mr. Chairman, would you be open to the idea of maybe every 2 to 3 years, we look at the policy, see what trends are like, and adjust accordingly?
James, that was going to be exactly a proposed friendly amendment. I was going to posit to you whether you would put as an additional point in the reserve policy that we, on some sort of regular basis, take inventory of whether that's more efficient or less efficient to rely more or less on insurance policy that may be available. To your point, insurance costs may go up as cyber attacks become more prevalent, and there may be some experience data that Access Health is a pretty safe investment. You know, the more years we're in business, you know, that sort of may be a mitigating factor. So I think we should, if you're amenable to it, add an intentional look on a periodic basis of whether our insurance amount should be calibrated up and down, and whether that changes our assessment of how much is needed in reserves.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we work with Susan in the insurance brokers to have an independent outside look at it, and maybe every 3 years at a minimum, and come back to the finance committee. And if they report to the finance committee what the report says, then I'm making the adjustments accordingly.
Yeah, that's excellent, because it could go either way, right? I mean, we could find that it's so cost prohibitive that we need to actually reserve more, or it could get a lot cheaper, in which case we may want to pivot differently. Yes. Commissioner Barton-Reeves, I have seen your hand up and down, but I'm not sure if it's a legacy hand, so I'll pause to see if you wanted to.
I'm sorry. It is, and I do have to go in just a couple of minutes. I apologize. Somebody popped in a 10:45 meeting that I didn't know anything about until 2 minutes ago. So I did. I just wanted to echo James's experience when I was standing up paid leave. It was extremely difficult, and I'm also at the WBDC event and they're cheering. It was extremely difficult for us to get cyber insurance, and because again, we were new, we had no history, and we were unknown, and that, I think, the risk continues to be quite high. I don't know, quite frankly, Mr. Finance Chair, if we can ever buy enough insurance, and if the market would be tolerant enough to be able to absorb the risk. So perhaps it's a combination of our having enough in reserves and then buying as much insurance as we can, which is what we ended up doing at paid leave, right? We ended up trying to set up some kind of reserve in case there was a cyber attack, and also buying as much insurance as they would allow us to, obviously with the approval of our finance committee, and then just keep revisiting that every year. So I offer that from very practical experience.
I'm totally aligned with you, Commissioner Barton-Reeves. That's exactly the hybrid in that combination, and making an intentional look at what's the right balance between the two, I think, is prudent for our finance committee moving forward and the full board.
So I apologize. I must go. And thank you, everybody, very much.
So, Mr. Chairman, we're going to amend the proposed reserve policy by adding that on a periodic basis, at a minimum 3 years. Every 3 years, we will look at our cost structure that's driving the reserve value, and report back to the committee, and adjust the reserve amount accordingly.
That sounds good. That sounds good to me. I'll pause for fellow board members seem to be nodding in agreement, so that sounds good.
Thank you.
So with that, should we entertain the vote with as amended, or do we want to hold for a formal amendment and come back at a future meeting for this? I'll pause to take direction from you, James.
We're happy to do whatever you want to do. We could adjust the policy, incorporate the new language, and take a vote at the next meeting so that everybody knows exactly what the complete policy looks like.
I think I would prefer that this way. Commissioner Brian Reeves, too, who had really good insight, could take a clean look at it, and we can all be very purposeful in setting that policy.
So that'll be a cleaner approach.
Yep.
Right.
Okay. So then that leaves us with the only item for a motion to adjourn. Do I have such motion?
So moved.
Moved. And
Second.
Seconded. Marchand, do we need to take a roll call for adjournment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we still
All
do.
right.
Claudio Gualtieri,
Yes.
Matthew Brackman,
Yes.
Thomas McNeil, Andrea Barton Reeves, and Manish
Yes.
Chani.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you all
day,
very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
Appreciate it.
everyone. Have a great
Bye.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.